Today we have an amazing guest. Mr. Hal Ziegler served in the Michigan State House of Representatives from 1967 to 1974, in the Michigan State Senate from 1975 to 1978, where among others he served with George W. Romney, the father of presidential candidate Mitt Romney. Looking forward to having him as a part of the Coffee Party conversation. Before we get to him, I wanted to take a quick moment and wish you all a happy Veterans Day. I hope you all will join me in wishing all those who have served and are serving our very best. With that, let's bring in Hal Ziegler. Hal, thank you so much for joining us today. How are you?
Thank you, Chris. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, we're excited to have you, and I know that you've got a lot to talk about, so let's dive right into it. One of the things I think that is an important part of this conversation, an important thing that you can talk about, is this notion of the lost art of compromise. What do you think about that?
Well, that's what I intended to talk about tonight, and the points you covered. It certainly is a lost art, and one that we better get back within the next 50 days, or we're in very serious trouble. I'll give you my spiel, because the best part of these shows are the people calling in and giving their opinion. Not that long ago, a group got together and argued and fought and compromised a lot, and then they met some more and argued and fought and compromised some more. Did they sacrifice their principles by all that compromising? No, they wrote the Constitution of the United States of America. Something I wish everyone would read, because it really is the best book I've ever read about really the art of compromise, and that's Doris Goodman's book, A Team of Rivals, and where Lincoln put his opponents on his cabinet. But he was really a master of knowing when and how to effect compromise, and he knew the need for it. And since the founders wrote our Constitution, compromise has been one of the principal bulwarks of making us the greatest democratic republic in the history of the world. With our diverse population, with the differences of opinion throughout the country, you have to have compromise. The only place that you don't have compromise is in dictatorships, my way or the highway. Just some visual images to think about. Many times over the years, you've seen joint signings of major pieces of legislation by the president. And while he was signing, he passed out pens to the leaders of both parties. You don't see that anymore. My goodness, Hurricane Sandy, it was a major news item. President Obama and Governor Christie appearing together. Why is that a major news item in the time of catastrophe that the governor from one party and the president from another appearing together? Just 2 years ago, for example, Charlie Crist lost the primary to a Tea Party candidate, primarily because when the president visited Florida, he had his picture taken with him. I mean, that's how bad things have gotten. In my time, and up till fairly recently, we put in our campaign brochures that we could work across the aisle, that we could work in a bipartisan manner. You don't see anybody putting that in their brochures today. Let me give you 5 reasons why I think that the art of compromise is dead and has to be revived. Excuse me. 1 is the infestation of the Tea Party into the Republican Party. 2, the signing of pledges by members of Congress with special interest groups, lobbyists actually. 3, the new filibuster rule that probably 100 people in the country outside of Washington are even aware of. The fact that, in my opinion, conservatism in the Republican Party in Washington has been replaced by obstructionism. And 5, the lack of leadership in both parties to break out of this logjam.
Well, I'll get back to the reasons in a second, but I wanted to ask you a couple of questions based on your earlier points. The first one, I think, is when you say that the Republican Party has been, I think your words were, invaded by the Tea Party. You were a Republican when you served in Michigan, right?
Yes.
And so give me your thoughts on what it's meant in the past 4 years to have this influx of people for whatever their motives are, but are moving the party dramatically to the right, particularly socially. What are your thoughts on how that occurred, and is that a fundamental flaw in the leadership of the Republican Party to not be able to counter some of that movement?
Absolutely. I use the term infestation, but invasion works fine. I had personal experience with the John Birch Society. They were very strong in one county in my district. Now, I mention that because to me, the Tea Party is just the son or daughter of the John Birch Society. The Koch brothers, the money behind the Tea Party, their father was a big financier of the John Birch Society. Their methods are the same. They're not, in my mind, I have to say Tea Party to communicate. I don't consider them a political party. I consider them a movement, in my mind, a stealth movement. And the John Birch Society was the same. When you voted, you did not see Tea Party on the ballot. They're not a political party. Now, the John Birch Society ran for school boards, and after they got on school boards, then they tried to ban all books that put Jews or blacks in a favorable light, even mentioning the Civil War. The Tea Party cleaned up their act because the John Birch Society fell out of favor because, frankly, they were very crude. Now, the Tea Party started sounding nice, but my personal opinion is if President Obama had been Caucasian, there would not be a Tea Party. Now, I'm not saying, obviously, that even the majority of members of the Tea Party are racist, but it certainly was a recruiting tool because they arose right after he was elected. And just a side note, some people are aware, some are not. The man who said
the Tea Party supposed to be a financial backlash. It was
exactly. They said that they were not Republican or not Democrat. Well, nobody that identified themselves as the Tea Party has gotten into the Democratic Party. As a matter of fact, a little aside, the man who stood up on the Chicago Stock Exchange said we need a Tea Party. He's been on television many times saying, I have nothing to do with the Tea Party. He was complaining about the lack of oversight on Wall Street. So they got into the Republican Party. Now, that's the Republican Party's fault. What is kind of interesting, they got into congressional House primaries. Small districts where a small number of votes, the turnout in primaries is terrible. They could get congressional seats. They failed at the state level where there's time for people to look statewide. They've been very poor record on Senate candidates, actually costing the Republican Party control of the Senate 2 years ago with the Eagle Buck Donnelly situation in Colorado, Nevada, and Delaware. And, of course, now we have Aiken and Murdoch losing in this cycle. So they are a stealth movement. As I say, just like the John Birch Society, they don't have the courage, nor do they have the message to run on their own. So now, your question, why haven't the leadership done anything about it? Because at this point, they have bowed down and catered to the bullying and dictatorial tactics of the Tea Party. Anybody who even mentions compromise or even compromised in the past is looking at a Tea Party opponent. John McCain, because he tried to work across the aisle on things like campaign reform with Senator Feinstein, he had a primary opponent. Tea Party went after him. Bob Bennett, this is an unbelievable case. Some people call him the most conservative member of the Senate from Utah. He made a speech against Obamacare, but he mentioned a possibility of one amendment that might improve it. For that heresy, in Utah, they picked their Senate candidates and caucuses. He was dumped. Orrin Hatch had a Tea Party opponent because he was too liberal. Orrin Hatch is too liberal. And, of course, the one case you really look at is Senator Lugar, one of the most respected senators ever to serve. His heresy was he worked in a bipartisan manner and became the foremost expert on foreign policy. You know, I bet those Indiana people felt like the people in London did right after World War II. As you know, the Prime Minister of England becomes Prime Minister because he's the head of the winning party. And so right after the war, the Labour Party won, and people were walking around London the next day and say, "My God, we just fired Winston Churchill." Well, I think the people in Indiana probably felt the same way, but it was their fault. They didn't vote in the primary.
I want to jump in here and remind everybody that if you're on the call, if you have something to add to the conversation, you have a question for Hal, just jump in, press 1 on your lines, and we'll get you in queue. So it leads us to the next and most obvious question, Hal. With that pressure that's on the Republican Party now, do we have the space for compromise? Or are we looking at a very, very serious problem in the coming, really, weeks before the so-called...
We are not only looking at a serious problem, we're looking at the virtual collapse of the economy. It may be worse than 2008. And I'll tie in what I mentioned about pledges and the filibuster, because they're part of this. Most people aren't aware, but a new fad, if you will, in Congress, members of Congress have signed pledges with special interest groups, actually lobbyists, selling their votes.
Tell us a little bit about that. I mean, I've heard a little bit about this, but I just want your clarification. So from what I understand is if I'm a lobbyist, I will support you financially if you pledge to never compromise on a particular issue, or the one that I remember most recently was the No New Taxes Ever pledge. I can't remember the name of it, but is that kind of what you're talking about? Well,
that's Grover Norquist's tax reform group. And it's even worse than you just said, because almost every Republican member of Congress has signed a pledge with him that they will never raise taxes. Well, number one, that's one of the 4 components of the debt, as Simpson Bowles had pointed out. So they've virtually given away their ability to even deal with the debt. Now, what does Norquist do with those pledges? He writes the members that time to renew, and I've got Congress in my back pocket, and he uses it to sign up new members. They've made him a millionaire. Now, if they don't, to be fair, there's a pledge that Democratic members have signed also on the other side to protect Social Security. That's a little vague, and maybe there's some out. They shouldn't sign them either. The only pledge these people should be signing is the Pledge of Allegiance. But this signing of a pledge with Grover Norquist is just absolutely a violation of their oath of office. Their oath says discharge their duties. How can they discharge their duties? The other thing I mentioned is the filibuster. Hardly anybody is aware that not too long ago the filibuster rules were changed. When you ask most people what do they envision a filibuster, they see, well, that's a senator or a couple senators talking nonstop, and they bring in cots and they sleep on the floor and they bring in pizza for their meals. Not anymore. One member of the minority party can go to his leader of the minority party and say, I invoke the filibuster. The minority party leader goes to the majority party leader and say, we have invoked the filibuster. Unless the majority party can come up with 60 votes, that's it. The filibuster was used more in the last 4 years in Congress than in its entire history before. One member, anonymously, without the public even knowing it unless they follow the goings-on 24/7 in Congress, is even aware of that. So it's tyranny by the minority. But that and the pledges and the Tea Party make it virtually impossible to compromise.
Let me ask you this. I want to get to a question that we've got through the chat. And somebody mentioned on the chat, let me see, it looks like Liz mentioned through the chat that we should abolish the Electoral College. And the reason being because many people, many parts of the country feel like their vote doesn't count. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I don't think that we need to eliminate the Electoral College. Actually, I kind of agree with them for a different reason, and that's the constant, and I blame the news media, when they labeled red and blue states. It's almost like unless you're in one of the 10 swing states, it doesn't matter, period. So the Electoral College has worked. I mean, it was obviously an integral part of the Constitution that the founders felt was necessary. So I'm not saying that eliminating is a bad idea, but that's a long-range change that will take a long time. We don't have the time to wait for that kind of change. We need structural change in redistricting, in primaries, and these are all very important things. The redistricting will be 10 years for the next census before you can even deal with it. But the problem of the failure to compromise is there right now, and you mentioned at the beginning of the show the fiscal cliff, which I'll talk about. But, Mitch McConnell said it all as far as the last 4 years and the attitude of the Republican Party in Congress. And keep in mind, I'm a lifelong Republican. I voted for Eisenhower, and Kerry was the first Democrat I ever voted for president. Even then, I was really voting against Bush for ignoring Wall Street problems and invading Iraq. But that's really doesn't matter. But when Mitch McConnell stood up and he was asked about his legislative agenda shortly after the president was elected, he said, "My total legislative agenda is to defeat the president." That's a violation of his oath of office again. How can he say he's discharging his duties with that statement? Is he saying that the sole purpose of a United States senator is to go to Washington and unseat the president? Well, that was the guy word and leading word for the last 4 years in the Republican Party. As I mentioned, one of the things, obstructionism has replaced conservatism. Barry Goldwater and Jack Kemp and Bob Dole and Ronald Reagan were conservative, but they weren't obstructionists. And what McConnell says is obstruction. I kind of like what Jeb Bush said. His father and Ronald Reagan wouldn't be welcome in the Republican Party. As a matter of fact, Ron Reagan Jr. took it one step farther. He said, "You're right, my father wouldn't be welcome in the Republican Party, nor would he want to be."
I want to get to the phones, Hal, and I think I'm going to bring in, I believe it's Liz. Liz, are you
Hi.
there? Area code
Yes, I am. Yes, I am.
Hi, Liz, and I wanted to weigh in on the conversation. I'm particularly interested in your thoughts, Liz, about how you believe that the Electoral College is creating an environment where compromise is not possible.
Oh my gosh! If you're sitting out here and you're listening to the way, I'm sorry, I forgot your name.
This is Hal.
Oh, Hal Ziegler.
Of course, yeah.
Hi, Hal. This is Liz I'm out here with the coffee party in the Lehigh Valley. This is in Pennsylvania. I'm about 5 minutes away from the Bethlehem Steel Corporation. Well, the ex-Bethlehem Steel Corporation. Why I'm calling and why I wrote that is because I have had so many young people. We have Lehigh University here. We have so many colleges here with so many students who do not want to vote. And their reasoning is because their vote don't count. Why bother? If you got this mentality, you are never going to change anything. We need to get rid of the electoral votes, and we need to start it today.
Let's get the reaction to that, Hal.
Well, I don't really disagree with that. As I said, I'm more interested in concentrating on the immediate crisis that we're facing. One thing about the young people, what you raise is certainly a valid point. Of course, remember there are other contests going on for state legislatures and local contests and so forth, so there's still every reason to vote in those elections. But it's not that I disagree and don't think that's something that should be seriously looked into. Maybe because I'm 80, I'm looking at the fiscal cliff right now. I'm looking at next year. If we don't get past and over this hurdle that compromise is a dirty word, nothing else is really going to matter. Those that say our country's best years are behind us are maybe going to be proven right. This is not something, compromise is not something we should hope for. The return of compromise is something that has to happen, or we're not going to make it.
60 years old. I'm only 20 years younger than you. So what I see here, What I hear you saying is, yeah, you want to go forward. And the compromise thing. Now, this is the first I've heard about compromise, by the way. I've never heard that word used within an election time. But the thing that I want to say here, and I think that we need to address, is that we got to get started now. We got to get rid of the electorals. You've got to get these people interested in voting. They're not going to vote, and you need to give them something. At least start the process. Start the process. Get them energized.
And this would be my question to you, Hal, and thanks for the comment, Liz. My comment is that does the Electoral College, and I know this is a very political science type question, but does the Electoral College lend itself to the lack of compromise? And I'll tell you why. Because we noticed in this last election, I live in Colorado, we were a swing state. We got a lot of attention from the presidential candidates. However, if you could control a few key states via the Electoral College, that is where most of the money, that is where most of the effort goes in. And if you don't have a national conversation, you don't have the ability to compromise from every single state, or voices from every single state demanding compromise, does that lead to an environment, sort of what we're here? So I guess my question to you is do you believe that the current state of the Electoral College doesn't lead to an environment that is more vitriolic? Is this part of the reason that we're in this environment with the Tea Party, and part of the reason why we're in this environment where people are refusing to compromise?
Well, let me say this. I will say that you raise a good point. If you couple it with an additional factor, if the polls are accurate, and apparently they're becoming very accurate, one of the silliest polls, if you will, for what it really means, is when they say that 90% of the people are dissatisfied with Congress and they want Congress to work together. And why I say silly is that it doesn't mean anything, because the same people are going back to Congress. Okay, let's add the Electoral College to one of the reasons, and I certainly don't have any reason to disagree with your point. I did a quick look through USA Today, and let's just say that 53% to 47% is a close district. Most congressional House seat. Most people think it's 52 and 48. But anyway, in the last election, there were only, I think, 41 House races that were within that parameter. In other words, almost 500 of the 535 seats are not contested. I can tell you in Michigan, 2 years from now, which party will win every congressional seat. In 4 years, there's one that if the Democratic Party candidate won in a landslide could go the other way. That's because of districting. And then you add the factor that the so-called moderate people in both parties who favor compromise, don't vote in the primaries. Then, if you couple that with your position, with your statement on Electoral College, I certainly would agree with you. But I don't think standing alone, that's the cure. And again, I keep going back to, yes, these are all things that have to be addressed. Yes, certainly the Electoral College should be looked at. But we've got to get past this hurdle now, or those issues will all be moot.
Yeah, I hear you. I want to get to John. John, thanks for holding. You're on with Hal and Chris.
Yes, hi. How are you, Chris? That's good. I just wanted to say I don't think the Electoral College, first of all, has really anything to do with anything, because I've seen studies done that if they removed it, certain of the bigger states would be targeted and smaller states would be left unattended. So you would have a lot of the same things that you have now. Getting beyond that, though, there was a ebook just written by David Blum, one of the Bush speechwriters, where he talks about the Republican Party being held hostage by right-wing talk and misinformation news networks, and this is creating this pivot to the extreme right that's going on right now, and I think that he's right. And you have to wonder what's behind that. Is it corporate? Are they trying to push? Because I agree with Hal. If you don't compromise, all you have is totalitarianism. And these people will tell you, because I talk to them all the time, how do you compromise morals? That's their thing, and they're very much set in the idea of putting down anything that is against what they themselves believe in. You have to be wrong. America is dead. Ted Nugent, this whole thing that's going on out there, there's a lot of it happening right now as we speak. They're very, very upset. And I don't see how we're going to get to that until we get to the point of really understanding what Blum was saying, which was, there's a lot of misinformation. And I'm not saying the Democrats are they need to get their act together too, but there's a lot of misinformation coming out of the right now, and it's creating this very extremist activity. And I think that's why the senators are playing to it, and the congressmen are playing to it. Because they want to be reelected.
It's John brings up
absolutely.
A very good question.
You really hit the nail on the head. I kind of laughing away because I can't say Fox News. I have to say Rupert Murdoch propaganda outlet. I have a hard time bringing myself to say Fox News. And just one example to show just how they distort it. For a half hour, when they saw the first release on the Supreme Court's decision on Obamacare, all they saw was Chief Justice Roberts wrote the majority opinion. For a half hour, they kept running the news that it had been declared unconstitutional. They thought so much that he was in their back pocket. And the other aspect of what you talk about is the wingnuts. I mean, my God, these people are afraid of Rush Limbaugh. He, by his own admission, when he started off with show business, going to have fun with politics. And he hit on a gimmick that's made him a multi-millionaire. And his show depends on ratings. Those ratings are only out if he lies, is as outlandish as possible. Yet there are people. I have a good friend who's a college graduate. I play golf with all the time, who swears by Rush Limbaugh. We don't talk politics on the golf course, obviously. But, yeah, you're absolutely right. Now, they're not twisting the majority of people's opinion, but a sufficient enough that they put fear into the politics. When Rush Limbaugh called that young gal who was testifying in Congress a prostitute and a slut, you know what? Mitt Romney's strongest comment he could make, because he didn't want to offend Rush Limbaugh, was, I would have used more elegant language. By the way, I want to clear up one thing on the introduction. I served as Republican under George Romney, one of the greatest men that I ever met. And I didn't want anybody to be confused that because I don't share the same feelings about Mitt Romney, that in any way I felt anything but awe about George Romney.
And I definitely want to get back to that. John, thanks so much for the call. I want to jump on John's point here for a second more and follow up that question. It seems to me that you hit the nail on the head when you said that they own large media outlets. And when I say they, I'm talking about right-wing media. They own large media outlets, and their job, more or less, is to try to get ratings. And the way they get ratings is they tend to be outlandish. That in itself probably is never going to change. What confuses me is why people that have been elected to higher offices, let's say the Senate, the U.S. Senate, to a Congress, a congressional office, are afraid to tell these people that they're being disingenuous and that they're hurting the party. Why do you think that is? Is it just a matter of wanting to be friends with the people that have the loudest voice?
That's an excellent point. I don't believe that every member of Congress, every Republican member of Congress, keep in mind I was a lifelong Republican, woke up one morning and all turned evil. This thing has been kind of gradual, but we've always elected a handful of fringe, almost certifiable people in Congress since the beginning of the country, but my God, not like West and Florida, who's saying 95 of the Democrat members of the House are card-carrying communists, or Welsh in Illinois, or why? I don't know. It's fear, obviously. I was the same in the sense that we all want to get reelected, but why they are afraid to take on these people? I mean, the combination of Fox News and Limbaugh and Beck is a formidable thing for someone to stand up and take issue with them. And I can't really answer your question because it mystifies me too. That all of a sudden,
it's a confusing piece. It's confusing indeed. Let's bring in Laura from Cincinnati. Hi, Laura. Thanks for joining. How are you?
You memorized my number, did you?
No. I have very smart people working behind the scenes that know such things.
I'm hanging in there, a little ragged, tired, just trying to survive in this crappy world that just keeps seeming to get crappier. But,
well, thanks so much for your call. And you like me, we're in a swing state. So the one thing that I'm happy about is when watching my Denver Broncos, I don't have to watch political ads this week.
Oh God, me too. It wasn't the political ads I could turn off. It was all the robocalls that drove me nuts. They all started out with the most negative sentences possible. But I wanted to say, number one is Hal, I'm sorry, but I agree with you. You have to take care of immediate problems first. If you don't stay focused, if you try to divvy yourself up into starting a bunch of things, then you're just not going to get it done. Just people don't understand multitasking does not work. Most people are not good at multitasking. Most people who've done research into it have found you're actually less effective and take longer and make more mistakes than you would if you just focused on one thing at a time.
It's a very good point, Laura, and thanks so much for the call. I want to ask you, Hal, and along the questions, and Laura, hang in there with me because I want your thoughts on this as well, I've heard this term now that if anything came out of this election, that if there was any mandate whatsoever, the silent majority, the silent middle in the United States has given our elected officials a mandate for compromise. And I think that more than anything else, if you listen to the exit polls and you try to make sense of the numbers, what people are trying to say to elected officials is we desperately want you to work together. We're sick of the vitriol. We're sick of politics of no, and we want people that are willing to work together. Is that the way you interpreted this election? And I want to ask you that same question.
Well, I'd like to believe it's so, but as I said earlier, unfortunately, those that were returned to Congress, well, let's put it this way, that they don't represent that point of view. The so-called middle class and moderates, frankly, aren't represented in Congress. To get back to the poll that shows that 90% of the people are fed up with the dysfunction in Congress and want them to work together, you'd think that, my goodness, Congress looks at that poll, well, it's all taken care of because they'll immediately start, how can they not do what 90% of the people want? It's simply because the type of congressman in the majority that gets there today is because they won the primary representing the extremes of both parties. There is no choice for people other than a few elections in the general election. It's too late. So, the discussion of the Electoral College is great. Redistricting is something that has to be looked at. The primaries have to be looked at. But that's happened. Yes, I think the people clearly sent a mandate they want Congress to compromise. But the ones that aren't there who would listen to it. In the poor lady that called about the robocalls and everything, I hate to tell her, but because of the Citizens United case, probably the worst case ever decided by the Supreme Court, which said that corporations can spend all the money they want. When I say corporations, I'm not talking about Ford or General Motors. I'm talking about corporations that are formed for the sole purpose of buying political ads. They can spend all they want, don't have to disclose the sources, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars in this last election because of that decision, and nobody knows even where the money came from. It could come from a foreign country. So the robocalls and the ads, there'll be more of them next time rather than less. The one thing, and kind of you alluded to it, is there's some indication they wasted their money.
Yeah, that's interesting. Laura, I wanted to ask you, being in a swing state and being now looking back at the election, do you think that people in swing states like Ohio, like in Colorado, that was the message that was being sent? And do you think that the elected officials are going to hear? Do we have a mandate for compromise?
I have to believe, and this is just my own theory, I have to believe that the majority in Congress still wants to compromise. And I'm going to touch on the point I mentioned about leadership because I have nothing to base this on but my own opinion. I think McConnell's statement showed that he has no desire to negotiate or compromise or anything, but it really doesn't matter. I think that there are plenty of Republican senators who want to work together with Democratic senators to solve the problems. I think it boils down to one person. I'll just dispense with the fact that I think Reid and Pelosi were weak leaders who weren't standing up making the case, explaining why there was so much dysfunction and gridlock. I think it boils down to Boehner. There are indications in Boehner's past that he wants to be a problem solver. To this point, as Speaker of the House, he has given in to the Tea Party. He has given in to the Tea Party. Now, he's got another problem. Eric Cantor is standing behind him with a knife in his hand, ready to put it in Boehner's back. The day after the election, Eric Cantor said he was going to continue the efforts to repeal Obamacare. 2 days ago, Speaker Boehner said, Obamacare is the law of the land. We will not be making any efforts to repeal. He and the Republican leader are now at odds on that point. Now, 6 times I watched Speaker Boehner in the last few days on television. 3 times he sounded very, very statesmanlike and conciliatory. 3 times he did not. It's almost like when he goes on television and makes the conciliatory statesmanlike comment, he goes back to his office and he catches hell from the extreme right, and then he's got to go back on television and sound tough again. Number one, I believe
the term for that is schizophrenic, isn't it?
Pardon?
I believe the term for that is a schizophrenic approach to policy.
Yeah, and I think he wants to, but one of the problems too, admittedly, is that with 24/7 news coverage, that openness in government is obviously a great thing and a wonderful thing, and you want it, but maybe it's not a good idea that he and the president are doing so much negotiating on television. Some things maybe are best suited for the smoke-filled room. Well, without the smoke now, but behind closed doors where they can roll up their sleeves and get the jabs on. Every time one makes a point on television, the other's got a counterpoint. That's not the way you negotiate an agreement. And, you know, when you open the show with the crisis that, 50 days away from the fiscal cliff. And, you know, if you just ask this basic question, well, every economist, every tax expert that has spoken on this said if we don't deal with the fiscal cliff, the economy will probably go into a recession, maybe worse than 2008. Wouldn't the logical answer be, well, obviously Congress isn't going to let that happen? Well, that's not such a logical answer because they might let it happen for a couple of reasons. And I still find it hard to believe they would. And maybe the solution will be, again, a 3-month extension, whatever. But it goes to the point you've raised a couple of times, that the situation has got so bad that here they are faced within the next 50 days with two actions they have to take. If they don't take them, we're going into a recession, and yet we're still debating about will they take those actions.
Yeah. I want to get to area code 814. Area code 814, I guess it's a Pennsylvania area code. Hi, who am I talking to?
Hi, it's Joshua Clark from Altoona, Pennsylvania.
Hi, how are you?
I just kind of want to make 2 points. One's along the lines of the right-wing misinformation machine. The other one's about taxation and how it's a global problem right now.
Please.
I was reading a lot into how Congress has been going about solving problems and stuff. And one of the things we've seen with the right-wing misinformation machine like Rush Limbaugh, Glenn Beck, and Fox News, what's not going to happen in Congress, unless every member of Congress gets back to facts, we're not going to have civil discussion in Congress. We're not going to have a respectful debate in Congress. When we have people denying the lived truth.
It's a very good point, and it's one that I think most of us at the Coffee Party believe in, which is there's a lack of fact-based conversations happening in politics in general, and it seems to me that the more information we have, the more television outlets, the more news outlets that we have, the more misinformation that we tend to have. How do you agree with that?
I don't agree with it. I think it's one of the very basic problems. And some things are really so simple, we don't even talk about them. The staffs are so big that the interrelation between members of Congress they don't even know each other. There's no personal relationship. The staffs do all the communicating back and forth. So there isn't any real debate going on. When was the last time you heard somebody call the Senate the greatest debating society in the world? I haven't heard that one in a while. Just very common things like you mentioned. They don't know each other. There's no personal touch. There isn't even the friendship that used to exist. And partly it's, when a new member comes to Congress, his professional staff immediately tells him that your job is you've got to get reelected, so you've got to get back home and raise money. And decisions are being made by the staff. But yes, it's a very good point he raises, that the whole business, the whole relationships in Congress has changed and changed greatly. And now you're seeing senators like Senator Snowe are just leaving in disgust because you just can't get the job done as they see it. And all of these are factors. And so the gentleman from Pennsylvania raises an excellent point.
Joshua, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but how do we get to a place where we can all at least agree on the facts to be able to have a fact-based conversation?
Well, one of the problems with it is that every time there's a piece of fact or information that comes out that disagrees with somebody's point of view on an issue, and I've seen this with the Tea Party a lot, especially like when the Congressional Budget Office comes out with some research or report that completely disagrees with what their view on the issue is, they immediately disavow the source of the information, even if it's a nonpartisan, non-political group or university study that comes up with the information. We immediately see the propaganda machines go in and just disavow the organization that came up with it.
Yeah, you kill the messenger as opposed to the message. Joshua, thanks so much for your call. I appreciate it. Getting to the 618, the Illinois area code next, but I wanted to ask a question, Hal, and it gets back to this concept of the last 4 years. It was the stated goal of most people in the Republican Party, at least in the House, to make President Obama a one-term president. Well, that failed. And we can argue the merits of why that failed. However, my question is that now that we're past that, will the Republicans, I think that they'll have to rethink this goal, but will that offer them an incentive to disavow these right-wing sort of voices in the conversation and start to come to the middle and start to come to the table and make the tough decisions that we need to avoid this fiscal cliff, and not just this fiscal cliff, because I do believe we're going to deal with it, but the other issues that we're going to have to deal with for the next 4 years. I think that the next 2 months are going to be incredibly important to describe how the next 4 years are going to go.
My first answer to that is personal opinion. As long as they listen to the Tea Party in their midst, the answer to that is no, it won't change. You know, there's always been times where we hit impasses and there was gridlock in Congress over certain issues. That's always been the case. The difference to me is it's become a strategy on every bill, not just a controversial bill, every bill. Example I'll point out, the transportation bill, which is totally bipartisan, passed overwhelmingly in the Senate. Obviously, they love it. It repairs bridges, roads, creates jobs, and everything else. That languished in the House for a year for one reason. It would create jobs. They weren't going to pass anything that would help the president on the job picture. The agriculture bill, again, overwhelming bipartisan support, is still sitting in the House for no other reason than it does some good. Nobody in the Senate is opposed to the agriculture bill. It goes to the House and it sits there. So my personal view is, as long as the bullying, dictatorial tactics of the Tea Party in the House are listened to and followed, no, it won't change. And I say the House because the Senate, there aren't enough bipartisan members over there. The problem in the Senate is to moderate or reasonable senators say, why put up my vote if it's going to go to the House and just get killed? So I'm pessimistic in the sense that as long as the Tea Party, in a sense, holds sway, it won't change. I'm optimistic in the sense is that with Murdoch and Aiken and Welsh and West and some of the Tea Party defeats that maybe things will change.
Let's go out to Illinois, area code 618. Who am I speaking with?
Hello, my name is Jeff Verity. I live in Collinsville, Illinois, right across the river from St. Louis, and I'd like to say hello to Hal and thank you for having him on the show. He and I actually know one another just a little bit. My question or comment is all of the callers and you guys seem to be discussing various reforms or solutions to the sort of gridlock and problems that we have in the electoral process. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are about the impact that money is having on the electoral system.
Oh, wow, what a big question. Yeah, that's a good one.
Well, and here's the reason I ask it. I checked into I got home from work and so I missed maybe the first 15 minutes of the show tonight. But what the conversation I'm hearing, and everybody seems to be talking about various forms of reform or solutions or compromise. And my belief is that the underlying root cause of all of it is the money. I guess the way I would illustrate that is to say that imagine a political process in which we had completely publicly funded elections. In other words, each candidate had the same amount of money that they had to spend, and it didn't come from corporations or big moneyed interests. It came from the people. That it was government funded. Now I know that sounds a little bit radical, but my feeling is that if we could get to that point, and I'm not naive, I mean, There are a number of groups out there that are talking about and building movements to amend the Constitution and once and for all say that money is not political speech and that corporations are not people. And once you take that out of the equation, would you agree that that opens the door for other reform, other common sense reforms that are out there, redistricting, open primaries, and so on? So I know it's a huge topic.
I certainly agree with Jeff, and he's a very honest guy because he identified that we do know each other. You know, not 20, 30 years ago, Lieutenant Governor of California, Jesse Unruh, hit the nail on the head when he said, money is the mother's milk of politics. Sure, money's fine. Now, you're going to have to amend the Constitution to do what Jeff wants, because the courts, freedom of speech, they just will never find a way to change anything. When Congress has made some efforts, you always get shot down on this freedom of speech argument, and you certainly can't say that the freedom of speech part of the Constitution isn't what it should be. But yeah, you have to start by getting the money out of the politics. The problem is in my mind, you have to amend the Constitution. You're going to have to get 38 states to stand up and do it. That's an expensive endeavor, well worth doing. But I certainly agree with Jeff that the very basis of the problem is money. You know, when you got a casino operator, billionaire owner in Las Vegas giving $45 million probably tip money to him, that's scary. When you see Mitt Romney appearing on the stage at a fundraiser with Donald Trump, George Romney would not have been on the stage with Donald Trump for any reason. It's scary because of the obvious influence it has in politics. You know, in the 10 elections I ran myself in the legislature, I just mentally kind of totaled up what I spent. I didn't spend as much in those 10 elections as somebody running for a state house seat in Michigan spends in a day. I mean, it's just overwhelming. Political action committees were just coming in my last year in the Senate.
We are now, after roughly an hour, getting to the root of, I think, the problem. And money in politics is clearly the issue. And Jeff, thank you very much for the call, and we really appreciate it. And thank you for getting to the root of the issue. I want to just remind callers that give us a call, 646-929-2495. We got a couple callers in queue, but we'd love to hear your voice in this conversation. It's an important conversation, and we need to have it. And I think that one of the things I'd like to shift the conversation towards is we understand that there's a lot of vitriol, there's a lot of lack of compromise. The question that I want to get to, and I'm going to get your thoughts first on it, Hal, and then we'll get to a couple calls, is, okay, so now what? What do we do? How do we turn the page as citizens and as a group of people that are committed to making this country better and are committed to making the political process better? What do we do now? What can we do? What can we lend our voice to, our collective voices to try to improve this overall system? I think clearly money in politics is one. Do we have to back comprehensive campaign finance reform? Is that then a amendment to the Constitution? Well, then so be it. If that's what it's going to take, is that what we need to do? Or is it simply making the silent majority of the United States, making the silent middle of the United States less silent? Is it just a matter of trying to energize those people that are sick and tired of the vitriol? We're sick and tired of people that are being controlled by special interests, our elected officials being controlled by special interests, letting our elected officials know that that's not acceptable. So I want to get your thoughts, Hal, on that basic concept. What is it that we need to do to start moving forward? And just before I get you, I've got you guys in the queue Georgia 770, Florida 954, California, another Georgia. I got you guys, and we'll get to your calls right after Hal answers this question.
My easy answer to what you just said is do exactly what you are doing. The Coffee Party and a group I have done some work with, the No Labels, are exactly where it has to come from. Grassroots movements, getting your voice louder and louder and louder, heard in Washington on the first issue of end the dysfunction and start working together. And then obviously the other major issues that you mentioned are important, will follow. But the first thing is that just the grassroots like the Coffee Party have to continue their efforts to get Congress to working together. You know, I don't mean to be facetious, but the two new exhibits when you walk in the Smithsonian are what a class that used to exist in the United States called the middle class, and right next to it are an exhibit of what used to exist in the Republican Party called moderate Republicans. Of course, obviously I'm a rhino, but I'm past even being a rhino. But the Coffee Party is where it has to come from, and the No Labels, the grassroots organization. Until the members of Congress hear from somebody other than the wingnuts and money, they have to hear from the people. They're not deaf, but the message isn't getting across yet.
I think that, and I'm looking in the chat, and our friend Liz from Pennsylvania says, "Now you're talking." I think that you hit the nail on the head. Let's take a call. Looks like we're going to go to Georgia, area code 770329. Whom am I speaking with in the lovely state of Georgia?
Hey guys, this is Patrick Thompson calling.
Hi, Patrick. Thanks for the call.
Thanks. Coffee Party member and just another failed congressional run here. Lots of lessons learned. I ran against a Tea Party Republican that's been in office for about 12 years. So one of the missing pieces here, and I've heard a lot of things discussed, I agree with everything that's been said tonight, but there's one missing piece, and it's a shadow in the room that's not playing its part, and it is because of money, and that is our media. So, you know, I've been listening to the media kind of discuss as soon as they got over the election, then they immediately started on the next thing to talk about, which has been, what do we do about the fiscal cliff? I mean, it's just been drumming. And what's missing in this whole discussion is the lack of our media and our democracy. And I know a lot of it has to do with money. So, for example, when you have a Boehner out there talking about how he just can't move, he can't compromise, because it's going to compromise his values. That no one ever questions him, and he gave 5 or 6 facts today, as they like to do. This will hurt, raising taxes will hurt small businesses. Nobody ever asked, could you please define small business for me? What do you mean by small business? What small business? Are you talking about, doctors and lawyers small business, or are you talking about the guy who has a shop on Main Street? Because they're vastly different. And no one ever asked those questions. No one ever asked about the report they're dragging out now is this Ernst & Young report that says, this is going to cost 700,000 jobs. Well, who did they ask? Who did Ernst & Young go to for that information? What are the details of that report? No one ever asked. They just let them spout off these statistics, but no one ever asked for the facts. And I found that locally in my election cycle. I wrote the articles for the paper. Basically what they would do is and I probably covered 6 or 7 different news sources in my congressional district, between print paper and online papers, online information, and some TV and radio. They would send me a survey, just like a lobbying group would do. And I got to where with the lobbying groups, I would write them back and say, well, let's just tell me what you want. Please just tell me. I'm not going to answer, umpteen questions. What do you want? And should I endorse you? I turned it around on them and said, hey, why am I asking for your endorsement? why should I endorse your organization? And I got some interesting answers back. But the main thing was there were what I really was disgusted with was the newspaper. Not a single one would sit down. I offered them, hey, you want to sit down and have a cup of coffee? Hey, you want to sit down and discuss what I'm all about and what we should be looking at or focusing on? No. And I was surprised at how many came out, even though I would write to them early. It would be, I have a deadline tomorrow. I have a deadline 2 days from now. Could you start the survey real quick? And then what they would do with the survey is pick and choose what information they wanted to be in the article. And some of them actually turned them into fake interviews. And I know that the journalistic ranks have been decimated like many other roles in America. But when I'm writing my own articles to be published, and then, when I did have a press release, not having any incumbency and not having any financial backing, you don't get press releases printed. But the other guys, just because who they are, you got CNN or whoever else calling them daily for, hey, you want to be on the news today? We want to ask you questions about so and so. And like I said, then they never really ask them questions. They come in and it's like the dog and pony show. Come in and we're going to throw some softballs up to you, and you can hit them out of the park, whatever you want to do. And it's the same with the town hall. You go to a town hall, and the town halls are not two-way discussions, and no one takes notes. I've never been to a town hall where anybody who's represented me actually sits down and writes notes and says, oh, yeah, good idea. Let me think about that. Let me take that back. It's always, this is what I think. This is what I'm reading. This is what I'm doing. Let me tell you what I'm doing.
Hey, Patrick, and we appreciate the call very much. And tell us again where you were running for Congress in Georgia.
Georgia District 11, which is a main part of Atlanta, and it includes urban and rural parts.
Well, we're sorry to hear about the loss, but thanks so much for the call. And you bring up what is one of the central themes, and I feel like I'm parroting my friend Eric Weiler, as we talk about the importance of independent media and the importance of social media in this change. And Hal, I know we talked earlier that you were self-professed technology. What did you use, the word dinosaur? Or I'm not sure what you said earlier, but that you're maybe not the most technically savvy guy, and I'm kind of with you on that. But there is this movement of independent media, and there is this movement of things like blog talk radio, things like blogging, and things like independent social networks. Do you believe that we're going to get to a day, maybe not today, but in the future, where people's voices and independent media will rival those of the big dollar medias that seem to be parroting kind of a right-wing agenda?
Oh, absolutely. And the fact I'm a techie idiot shouldn't lead anybody else. Of course, I mean, it's tremendous. The 24/7 coverage and the media and independence and everything is great. One little drawback is that there's too many people. Somebody puts some idiotic thing on the internet, and by the end of the day, 5,000 people agree with it. It must be true if it's on the internet. I want to say one thing. I wish that gentleman had won. He made one reference that absolutely summed up his point 100% to show how right he was as far as the news media. When the president, whether you disagree or agree with policy, when he says that we should ask a little bit more from those making $250,000 or more, Boehner gets on television and says, "Oh, that's wrong. We shouldn't do that because you don't want to tax the small business people who are job creators." That has absolutely no relationship, period, when the president is talking about tax breaks for those making over $250,000. He's not talking about the operators of small business. I think one economist said that that's probably 1% of the people. So anyway, he's absolutely right, because right there, the media should have said, wait a minute. Please define what you just said. And they don't. Candy Crowley at the debate, it was the only time I've heard a moderator correct a misstatement. But you're absolutely right that the hope is that, and usually competition drives the losing side to begin to do the right thing. More and more, hopefully, the mainstream media, as it sees these independent networks rise up, will realize we better begin to be the same way. So, yeah, that's where the change has to come from.
And a moment of editorializing on my part. That's why these outlets, such as the Coffee Party, are so critically important. And your involvement is so critically important in the Coffee Party, the collective involvement, because I believe wholeheartedly that we are the silent majority. But we're not going to be silent anymore. We're going to make sure that our voice is heard. We've got a few callers. We're going to try to quickly get through them. We've only got about 20 minutes left in the show. From Florida, the area code 954. To whom do I have the pleasure of speaking with them there in Florida?
Hi, Neil from Fort Lauderdale.
Hi, Neil. How are you?
Good. And I really hope that independent news becomes more prevalent, because they really didn't report what was really going on, because both sides of the coin are heavily invested by the same people. The Republicans, they ran on jobs. The entire time, they filibustered every jobs bill. There was about 17 job bills they filibustered. To me, that's economic treason. Boehner was talking about it's going to affect small business if we, raise taxes on $250,000. To them, small businesses is Walmart. It's not the mom and pop stores. It's basically they're playing games like. The media does not ask the questions that they should be asking and getting the correct answer. It's just a pony show. It's ridiculous, a trick and pony show, because we need to stand up. This was a mandate. There was 3 million people that voted more. Obama won the Electoral College handily. The American people deserve jobs. They deserve good-paying, living wage jobs. And I'm really tired of the Republicans just stalling everything.
It's an excellent point, Neil, and Hal, I'll get your quick thoughts on that.
Well, he's absolutely right, and as I mentioned earlier, I never once heard the news media ask or Boehner try and explain why they were sat on the transportation bill, totally bipartisan bill for almost a year, and why the agriculture bill, totally bipartisan in the Senate, still hasn't passed. The basic reason is it would create some jobs. They were, as the gentleman said, there was a concerted effort to kill anything that would improve, that's a pretty cruel thing to say, that would improve the job market, that would bring people back to work. And that's, of course, what I meant about this isn't a conservative party. This is an obstructionist party. I refer to, as a lifelong Republican, to the old party. This is a new party. The one has nothing to do with the other. As Jeb Bush said, his father and Ronald Reagan would not be admitted in the Republican Party today, and as young Ronald Reagan said just the other day, took a step further, no, my father wouldn't be admitted in the Republican Party today, nor would he want to be.
I want to get to these other callers, Hal, but it's such an important point, and it's one that I want to bring. I just want to dive into a second deeper. Is it difficult for you, Hal? You're a lifelong Republican. You served a bunch of years under a party banner that you no longer feel like you have a home in. Is it a tough thing for you to swallow?
It's not difficult. It just makes me madder than hell. I didn't wake up one morning leaving the party. To me, it was the two lies that led to the invasion of Iraq and the stories that were coming out about the criminal neglect overseeing Wall Street, which led in the main to the economic collapse. And as I say, it's not difficult. I'm enjoying it. I'm madder than hell about the Republican Party today. I think I wrote an article once that they have expelled every Republican leader from Lincoln to Teddy to Eisenhower to Ford to Reagan. They virtually expelled them because there's no relationship between the Republican Party today and the Republican Party that I was loyal to, and put a lot of hours in. When I wasn't running, I was involved in somebody's campaign. I didn't just vote. I was very, very involved. So, no, it's not difficult for me a bit. I'm enjoying it. Anytime I can stick a fork in them, I'm enjoying it. immensely.
I like it. Very good. We're going to go to the area code 707 in California. Who am I speaking with?
Hi, my name's Linda. And
hi, Linda.
A couple of questions. Let me take. I think I need to take you off of speakerphone. I think it interferes. Okay. My questions. Well, actually, I'm agreeing with a lot of people. As far as the money, and my question would be, were all this like $6 billion or whatever it was that went towards political funds, that were used this last time? That money went to, I assume, media outlets and things like that to get the word out for the different candidates. And it's not in their best interest for us to try and get the money out. I mean, I loved what I think it was the man from close to St. Louis, where he said that it's probably like a utopian view, but where you could have everyone having exactly the same amount of money, so that you can get the best candidates who are actually are willing to do what they say they're willing to do, and they're not have anybody twisting their arms. And I don't see the media trying to help us with that, because they must have made a killing with this money that was in the election last time. And then
I can speak directly to that, Linda. That the guys that I know in the TV business had a very good year based on this election, at least in Colorado, and I know Ohio and other places.
Yeah. And I'm concerned also about them going after the internet next.
Well, interesting. I want to get your thank you so much for your call, Linda. We really appreciate it. And Hal, your thoughts?
If I hear the gentleman correctly, he's saying that the news media might have a monetary interest in enjoying this tremendous spending. Heaven forbid. I guess they do. I mean, you got to take the money out, and doing it. What the gentleman mentioned about public funding and of elections and so forth is basically the British system, and in essence, what they do is there's a quasi-governmental agency. They set the amount of money a candidate can spend. Of course, they have a much shorter election span. The amount of money a candidate can spend, and they don't get into any kind of censorship of what the candidate does with money. All they really monitor is the amount and make sure they stay under a limit. Of course, I say their election spans are a little shorter. Time magazine this week, we're talking about 2016 presidential candidates already. So the money cycle will start earlier.
One of the biggest issues? Is it one of the biggest issues? Is I was talking to a friend from Canada, and he said, for better or worse, we have I think it's 12 weeks from once they call a parliamentary election to the election date. For the worst, it can get bad and it can get tough, but it's at least a shorter period of time. Our election season has gotten to be close to a 4-year election cycle, hasn't it?
Yeah, it sure has. I shouldn't laugh. It's not funny. It's terrible.
No, it's funny in the sense of the absurd. Going to go next to Georgia, area code 404. Lots of calls from Georgia today. Area code 404. Who do I have this pleasure of speaking with?
This is Robert. I'm calling you from Acworth, Georgia, just outside Atlanta. I've spoken to you before. How are you guys doing?
Hi, Robert. We're great. Thanks so much for your call, and thanks for lending your voice to the conversation.
Just a couple of quick points. I know you're almost off the air. The Citizens United thing, my biggest problem with the Citizens United issue is that I have been arguing about money in politics prior to Citizens United, and basically what they did is they added to the problem. They already had an extensive amount of money in politics through the lobbyist system, which is out of control already. And I don't mean any particular lobbyists, I mean them all. I have the ones that I like and the ones I don't like, I guess, but I don't like money in politics whatsoever. I'm to the point now where I just wish we would just walk into a voting booth and there would be names and there wouldn't be a party affiliation in any way, shape, or form. So hopefully the people would know what was going on. So now we're fighting Citizen United, which basically they take the money from that, and that moved it to the front of the cycle, as opposed to after they get elected and here's a lobbyist coming to you and drawing you that way. So now we have it on both ends. So it is really, really crazy now. And if we're able to get rid of one soon, we're still going to have the other one there. So the fight is going to be long and hard. I can tell you that I was encouraged about a couple of things that happened in the election cycle. There was a report that came out a couple of days ago about a number of people that were removed, that lost elections, that had problems, either ethics or prosecutions or investigations or very credible things that were negative against them. And we don't want people like that in our government. And there were Republicans and Democrats, about an equal amount of both. So and I didn't know about a few of those people as far as like major that was put out there. Of course, our media is lacking anyway. But I thought that was encouraging. That told me that maybe I'm being a little more cynical than necessary on our public not being informed, because that told me that a lot of people were informed on about that, because as far as the states were concerned, that just because the state voted one way for, let's say, the presidential election, they didn't necessarily vote the same way for their other candidates. And I like that, regardless of what the results are, because then again, everybody's doing it the way they're supposed to. They're looking at the individual candidates. At least that's what you hope that's going on. That's what it appears to be to me when I look at it that way initially. And I know you don't have a lot of time, so I just wanted to say those few things, and I thank you guys for doing what you do.
Hey, Robert, thank you so much for the call. We really appreciate it. Thanks for everybody that's joined in and led their voice to the conversation. I want to get back, Hal, and talk a little bit about what we talked about earlier and what Robert just hit on a little bit. We've talked a lot about money in politics, and we've also talked about what it is that we need to do to help move this country forward. And the Coffee Party is certainly committed to doing that and doing it in the right way. From your experience of 50-plus years in politics, what can we draw on for inspiration? What are the things that we need to look back on to say, this is what we need to emulate to try to bring some civility back? Or are we just in a day that we've never seen before in politics?
Well, yeah, we are. But, I'm not going to be negative to say that day will just continue on forever. Just one practical thing, by the way, that even with the emails and so forth and the instant way of communication, I tell people to write a letter. One letter that an elected official gets is worth more than 100 emails or 100 signatures on a petition. When somebody sits down and takes the time to write a letter long, there's a lot of practical things you can do. Get involved with your congressman's district office. Usually the person closest to the congressman is not his staff in Washington. They're professional. They were there when he got here. The person that runs his home office is usually somebody who's a friend who, because of some circumstances, didn't really want to pick it up and go to Washington, but agreed to run a local office. Make contact with that person. It's a great way to initiate contact with your congressman. But bottom line still is it's votes, and if you really, as the Coffee Party is doing, I think there's a lot of awareness of the Coffee Party in Washington. You get referred to a lot. You just got to keep up your efforts of the direct communication. Real quick parable I always liked, what the gentleman talked about lobbyists and all of that, is kind of sums it up, I guess, for human nature. Shortly after Lincoln was elected, a friend came in and wanted Lincoln's help pushing a bill through Congress, and he didn't say bribe or anything, but he mentioned $5, $10, $15, $25,000, a lot of money at that time, and he mentioned $50,000. Lincoln grabbed him and threw him out of the office. And he said, Abe, don't get mad. And he said, I'm not getting mad. You're just getting dangerously close to my price. Well, there's a lot of truth in that. These guys aren't bought, But after all, if somebody dumps $50 million into your campaign, you're more likely to have dinner at the White House than you and I. But it has to come from the grassroots. That's the only way. You can't compete with the money. You can't compete with districting. You can't compete with the primary system until they're changed. So right now, grassroots, and as you mentioned, the independent media, that's really the only things that exist that can turn this dysfunctional Congress around.
In the time we have left, we just have a little over 7 minutes left. I want to get back to the fiscal cliff. And you mentioned writing letters. I think it's a really critical time in the next at least 4 years of politics, because I believe this negotiation is going to set the stage for what the next 4 years look like. I hope, as I think most people do on both sides of the political spectrum, that we can get things accomplished, that we're not going to be in this politics of no. Writing letters, certainly an option. What else can we do to get involved? Is it phone calls? Is it what kind of pressure can we apply to our people in Congress, to our U.S. senators, to try to get our politicians the space to negotiate?
What you have to do, number one, is make Congress aware that the average citizen, I hate that word average, but the average citizen is aware of the fiscal cliff issue.
Do you think
right now they're not hearing
matter?
From the average citizen as much as they should. They're hearing from special interests.
Do you think it's a matter of Congress not knowing the average? So you said the average citizen, but do you think it's the average Congress member is not aware of how dire that we in their districts believe the situation is?
I would say I'd put it a little different. I'd say the average congressman's in denial. They know, but they're in denial that there's a strong movement out there that wants them to compromise, wants them to quit being dysfunctional, wants them to work together. They're turning their ears to the voices they want to hear.
Interesting. We have time for one last caller. Area code 703 just came on board. Who am I speaking with in area code 703?
This is Ed Conant from Savannah, Georgia. The area code doesn't fit that. It's my cell phone. I used to live in Northern Virginia.
Hi, Ed. How are you?
I'm doing well. I just I briefly
just a
want
couple
to.
of minutes left.
Oh, this is quick. I just want to tell you that I compliment the Coffee Party Radio on selecting Hal Ziegler as a commentator, because I've fortunate enough to have developed a friendship with Hal. He lives in my hometown of Jackson, Michigan. He's had a lot of experience. He's a wise man, and it's a good thing that you've got him on there. He has a great perspective. And that's it. Just wanted to say that.
Thanks so much. And I want to echo that, Hal. I've really thoroughly enjoyed our conversation and looking forward to your participation in the future.
Well, remember what Senator Moynihan said, though, we should all live by. Everybody is entitled to their own opinion. No one is entitled to their own set of facts. I appreciate at my age being given this opportunity to vent my spleen. Thank you very much, Chris, and to the Coffee Party.
We certainly appreciate it, and I, for one, am feeling pretty inspired after the conversation today. I think that there's a lot of very practical steps that I and we collectively can take to try to move this conversation forward. So that's going to be it. We're going to play with this one last clip, and we're going to sign off. Thanks for everybody. My name is Chris Franks, and I really appreciate the opportunity for guest hosting today on The Bottom Line.